Miguel Rojas had worked in the textile factory for nearly 10 years. He knew every sound, every machine, and every danger that came with the job. The factory floor was always noisy, filled with the humming of spinning machines and the chatter of workers trying to make a living. It was just another evening shift, or so he thought. Miguel walked past rows of machines, checking for any problems. The air smelled of oil and fabric, the usual scent of the factory. As he moved to inspect one of the large spinning machines, something caught his eye. A small movement, too small to belong to any of his coworkers. He frowned and stepped closer. At first, he thought it was a piece of fabric stuck under the machine. But when he crouched down and looked underneath, his heart nearly stopped. It wasn't fabric. It was a child. A little girl, no older than 7, was trapped under the machine. She was curled up, her tiny body squeezed into the narrow space, her face pale with fear. But Miguel's eyes went straight to her hand. It was stuck in the gears of the moving machine. His breath caught in his throat. The machine was still running. The girl's lips trembled, but she didn't scream. Maybe she was too scared, or maybe the pain had left her weak. Her eyes, wide and filled with tears, locked onto his. She needed help. Now. Miguel's hands shook as he shouted for help, but the factory was too loud. Machines clanked and roared all around him. No one heard him. There was no time to wait. He had to act fast. His eyes darted to the emergency shut-off switch, but it was too far. If he ran to hit it, the machine might pull her hand in further before he got back. Miguel's mind raced. He grabbed the wrench from his belt, his only tool at the moment. His fingers tightened around the cold metal. He had one chance. With all his strength, he jammed the wrench into the gears. The machine screeched, metal grinding against metal. Sparks flew as the gears struggled against the sudden stop. The machine groaned, then silence. Miguel's heart pounded in his chest. The girl was still trapped, but at least the machine wasn't pulling her in anymore. He dropped to his knees and reached for her hand. Her fingers were crushed between the gears, blood trickling down her wrist. The little girl whimpered, her body trembling. Miguel swallowed hard. She was still conscious, still breathing. That was good, but she wasn't safe yet. He turned and yelled again, louder this time. Help! Someone help! A few workers finally noticed and rushed toward him. The fight to save the girl had only just begun. The noise of the factory floor seemed to grow louder as Miguel held the girl's hand. Her small fingers were still pinned beneath the metal gears, and he could feel her pain through his touch. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her lips trembled, but she didn't cry. She was trying to be brave, but Miguel knew she needed help, and fast. Miguel, what happened? A worker named Carlos came running over. He was one of the supervisors and had heard Miguel's calls. His face went pale when he saw the girl trapped under the machine. Miguel didn't waste any time explaining. Her hand. It stuck. We need to get it out before it's too late. His voice was shaking, but he tried to stay calm. The girl's hand was turning a strange color now. Her fingers were pale, and the blood flow was being cut off. Carlos knelt down beside Miguel and looked at the machine. He immediately understood the situation. We have to stop the whole machine. The emergency shutoff is too far. Let me get a crowbar. It might be the only way to pry the gears apart. Miguel nodded, his mind racing. Every second counted. He looked back at the girl, whose eyes were now locked on his face. She was trying to say something, but no words came out, only soft sobs. Miguel could see how frightened she was. He gently squeezed her hand, trying to reassure her without saying anything. Carlos was gone for only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Miguel could feel his own heart beating faster with every passing moment. He didn't know if the girl could hold on much longer. When Carlos returned, he was holding a heavy crowbar, his face serious. He dropped to his knees and immediately started working on the machine's gears. I'm going to try and break it loose, he said, his voice calm but tense. "Miguel, stay with her." Miguel nodded and stayed by the girl's side, watching as Carlos fought against the thick metal. The sound of the crowbar scraping against the machine was deafening, but Miguel barely noticed. All he could think about was the girl's hand. The girl was still looking at him, her eyes wide with fear, but now there was something else in her eyes too, a glimmer of hope. She must have sensed that help was on the way. Miguel couldn't bear to think of what would happen if they didn't get her out. Carlos grunted as he worked, pulling the crowbar with all his strength. The gears started to move slightly, but not enough to release the girl's hand. Sweat was dripping down Carlos's face as he struggled, but he didn't give up. Miguel looked back at the girl. "It's going to be okay," he whispered. "We're going to get you out." But the truth was, Miguel wasn't sure if that was true. He was praying it was, but he didn't know how much longer the girl could hold on. Her hand was still trapped, and time was running out. Every second felt like a lifetime. Finally, Carlos gave one last, powerful push with the crowbar. The machine groaned, and then, with a loud snap, the gears gave way. The girl's hand was free. But it wasn't over yet. Miguel knew that. She was free from the machine, but her hand was still badly injured. Miguel carefully cradled her hand in his, trying not to hurt her. "You're safe now," he whispered, even though he knew the hard part wasn't over. Miguel cradled the little girl's hand, careful not to touch the injured fingers too much. Her hand was badly hurt, and Miguel could see the deep marks left by the machine's gears. The skin was bruised and blood was still dripping, but there was no time to waste. "Carlos, we need to get her to a hospital now." Miguel's voice was urgent, filled with panic. He could feel his heart racing in his chest. The girl, still trembling, had stopped crying, but the fear in her eyes was clear. Carlos nodded quickly. "I'm calling an ambulance right now." He pulled out his phone and rushed outside to find a better signal. Meanwhile, Miguel stayed by the girl's side. He gently wiped away a tear that had fallen from her cheek, trying to comfort her. The other workers on the factory floor had gathered around, but none of them could help. They were all just standing there, watching helplessly as the minutes ticked by. Miguel tried not to pay attention to them. His focus was entirely on the girl and getting her to safety. The factory was too far from the nearest hospital. Time was running out. Miguel knew that if they didn't get her help soon, she could lose more than just her fingers. He turned to Carlos as he returned. "How long until the ambulance arrives?" Carlos shook his head. "It'll be a few minutes, maybe longer. The factory is in the middle of nowhere. We're too far from town for it to be quick." Miguel cursed under his breath. The girl was still holding his hand tightly, but now he could feel her shaking even more. She was in shock, and he knew he had to stay calm for both of them. Just then, the sounds of sirens broke through the factory noise. Miguel turned and saw the ambulance pulling up outside. His heart leaped with relief. The ambulance crew rushed in, taking charge immediately. "Let us help her," one of the paramedics said, kneeling down beside Miguel. "We need to get her stabilized. She's losing blood." Miguel didn't let go of her hand, but he stepped back, allowing the paramedics to do their job. He watched as they carefully wrapped her hand in gauze and checked her other vitals. The girl seemed so small and fragile as she lay there, her face pale and her eyes half closed. The paramedics worked quickly. "We've got to get her to the hospital fast. She's going into shock. Can you walk with her to the ambulance?" Miguel didn't hesitate. He nodded and moved beside the stretcher, staying close to the girl the whole time. He didn't want her to be scared alone. He could see the worry in her eyes, but there was also a quiet trust now, as if she knew Miguel would stay with her no matter what. When they reached the ambulance, Miguel climbed in beside her. He couldn't take his eyes off her, not for a second. The ambulance sped off toward the hospital, the sirens wailing loudly in the night. Miguel prayed that they would make it in time. As the city lights flickered by, Miguel held the girl's hand again, whispering soft words of comfort. She was still awake, still scared, But now, there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Hang in there," he said softly. "You're going to be okay." But Miguel knew the fight wasn't over yet. They had to get to the hospital first, and then they would see if her hand could be saved. The ambulance raced through the dark streets, its sirens piercing the quiet night. Inside, Miguel sat beside the little girl, his heart thundering in his chest. Her tiny body was still trembling, her eyes fluttering as she fought to stay awake. The bandages on her hand were soaked in blood, but the paramedics had done their best to stop the bleeding. Miguel couldn't stop looking at her. She looked so fragile, her face pale, her breathing shallow. He could feel the fear tightening in his chest, but he knew he couldn't show it. The girl needed him to stay calm. "Stay with me," Miguel whispered, squeezing her uninjured hand gently. She looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with both pain and trust. She nodded weakly, but her lips quivered as she tried to speak. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Miguel's heart broke. "You don't need to thank me," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm just glad I was there to help." He could hear the urgency in the paramedics' voices as they worked quickly to stabilize her. The ride to the hospital seemed like an eternity. But at last, the flashing lights of the hospital entrance appeared. The ambulance pulled into the emergency bay, and the paramedics immediately moved the girl onto a gurney, racing toward the hospital doors. Miguel followed closely behind, his heart still in his throat. Inside, the hospital was a flurry of activity. Nurses and doctors rushed to meet them, and the little girl was quickly surrounded by medical staff. Miguel stood back, feeling a wave of helplessness. He watched as the doctors quickly examined the girl's hand, checking for signs of circulation and nerve damage. A doctor turned to Miguel, his expression serious. "We need to take her into surgery immediately," he said. "The injury is severe. If we don't act fast, she could lose her fingers, or worse." Miguel nodded, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. He had known this could happen, but hearing the doctor say it out loud made the reality hit even harder. "Will she be okay?" Miguel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The doctor hesitated for a moment before responding. "We're going to do everything we can, but there's a chance she could lose some or all of her fingers, depending on the damage. We won't know until we get in there." Miguel's heart sank. He thought of the little girl, so full of life just moments ago. He couldn't bear the thought of her losing her fingers, her whole future changing in an instant. "Please," Miguel said, his voice shaking. "Please save her." The doctor nodded solemnly and motioned for the nurses to take the girl into the operating room. Miguel couldn't bring himself to leave just yet. He followed them down the hallway, his mind racing. As the operating room doors closed behind the medical team, Miguel paused for a moment. The situation was out of his hands now, but he couldn't stop thinking about the girl. He had saved her from the machine, but now it was up to the doctors to save her future. Miguel sat down in the waiting area, his mind spinning. He had no idea how long the surgery would take, but one thing was certain. He wasn't leaving the hospital until he knew she was okay. Miguel sat in the hospital waiting area, his hands clenched together in his lap. The fluorescent lights above flickered as the minutes stretched into hours. Every second felt like a lifetime. He kept looking at the clock on the wall, watching the time tick away, and his mind kept racing back to the little girl he had tried so desperately to save. It was hard to sit still. His mind replayed the moment when he first saw her trapped under the machine, her small hand caught in the gears, and the horrible screech of metal against metal. He could still hear it in his head. If he hadn't been there, Miguel couldn't finish that thought. It was too painful to even imagine. A nurse walked by, her footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Miguel stood up quickly. "Any news?" he asked, his voice tight. The nurse smiled gently but didn't stop walking. "The doctors are still in surgery. We'll let you know as soon as we have an update." Miguel nodded and sat back down, trying to hold it together. The hospital felt cold and sterile, a place where lives were changed in an instant, where the line between life and death seemed so thin. He could hear the hum of machines in the background, the quiet voices of doctors and nurses, but none of it mattered. He only cared about the girl now. Another hour passed. Miguel tried to pass the time, but his mind wouldn't stop. He thought about her family. Who were they? Where were they? He wished they were here. They needed to be with her, to comfort her while she was in surgery. But they had no idea where she was, or what had happened. Suddenly, the doors to the surgery room opened, and the doctor who had spoken to him earlier stepped out. Miguel jumped to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. "How is she?" he asked, his voice shaky. The doctor looked tired but relieved. "We were able to save her hand," he said. "There was a lot of damage, but we were able to restore blood flow, and we didn't have to amputate any fingers. She'll be able to use her hand again, but there may be some long-term effects. The nerves were damaged, so it'll take time to heal fully." Miguel let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. She was going to be okay. The doctor smiled faintly. "She'll be in recovery for a while. You can see her soon, but she's still weak." Miguel's knees felt weak as well, and he had to steady himself on the chair next to him. Relief flooded through him like a wave, and he couldn't help but feel tears welling in his eyes. She was going to be okay. The doctor patted him on the shoulder before leaving. Miguel sat back down, his head spinning. He had been so terrified of losing her. And now she was going to be all right. But it wasn't over yet. She had a long road ahead of her, full of recovery and healing, and Miguel knew she wasn't out of danger completely. But for now, at least she had a chance. Miguel stood up again, his heart light for the first time since the accident. He walked to the recovery room, his footsteps quick and hopeful. When he saw her, really saw her, awake and alive, he knew that everything he had done to save her had been worth it. As he entered the room, he saw the girl lying in bed, her hand wrapped in bandages, but her eyes were open. She looked up at him with a faint smile. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice weak but sincere. Miguel smiled back, his heart full of warmth. "You're welcome," he said softly. "You're going to be okay." The days that followed were filled with recovery. The little girl, whose name Miguel had learned was Sofia, stayed in the hospital for several more days. Her hand was badly injured, but the doctors assured her that with time and therapy, she would regain most of the movement in it. Sofia was still weak, but she was beginning to smile more, and the fear that had once clouded her eyes was slowly fading. Miguel visited her every day. Each time he walked into the hospital room, Sofia would greet him with a small smile, and Miguel's heart would swell. He had saved her life, but in doing so, he had gained something else too, an unexpected bond with this brave little girl. On the 4th day of her recovery, Sofia was sitting up in bed, her bandages still wrapped tightly around her hand, but she seemed much stronger. The doctors were hopeful she would be able to go home soon. Miguel sat beside her, watching as she played with the toys she had on her bedside table. They were simple, small figures, nothing fancy, but to Sofia, they seemed to bring her comfort. Miguel couldn't help but notice how quiet she had become in the past few days. It was like she had slipped into her own world, where the pain and the fear were easier to handle. "How are you feeling today, Sofia?" Miguel asked, gently. Sofia looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. She still wasn't talking much, but she nodded slowly. "I'm okay," she whispered. Then, after a moment, she added, "My hand hurts, but I'm getting better." Miguel smiled warmly. "I'm glad you're getting better. It's going to take time, but you're a fighter. I can tell." Sofia's lips curled into a tiny, shy smile. She seemed to be gaining a little more confidence each day. They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of the hospital echoing around them. The beeping of machines, distant footsteps, and soft voices drifted through the room. Despite the busy atmosphere, Miguel felt a peace settle in his heart. He had done what he could to save her, and now it was her turn to heal. Sophia picked up one of the small toy figures and handed it to Miguel. "You can play too," she said, her voice small but earnest. Miguel took the toy from her, grateful for the simple gesture. They spent the next few minutes playing with the little toys, not saying much, but enjoying each other's company in a way that didn't require words. There was something about the quiet bond they shared that felt stronger than anything he could explain. As the days passed, Sophia became more like herself. She laughed again, even though it was a soft sound, and her energy began to return. Miguel watched her slowly regain the spark in her eyes that had been dimmed by the trauma she'd gone through. One afternoon, as he sat beside her bed, Sophia turned to him and said softly, "Thank you for saving me." Miguel smiled and took her hand gently, careful of the bandages. "You don't have to thank me. You're the brave one. Sophia, you fought through all of this, and you're still fighting." Sophia nodded, her small hand squeezing his in return. It was a simple, innocent moment, but for Miguel, it felt like the deepest kind of gratitude. The little girl he had saved had turned into someone he would never forget, a reminder that sometimes saving a life meant more than just fixing an injury. It was about making a difference. And in that moment, Miguel realized that his life had changed, too. It had been 2 weeks since Sophia had first been brought to the hospital, and she was finally going home. The doctors were impressed with how quickly she had recovered, especially considering the severity of her injury. Her hand was still bandaged, but the swelling had gone down, and her doctors were confident that with therapy, she would regain most of her movement. Miguel stood in the hospital hallway, waiting. He had become a regular visitor, and today he was here to see Sophia off. He had watched her go through so much over the past few days: fear, pain, and uncertainty. But he had also seen her grow stronger. Sophia had faced something no child should ever have to face, and yet here she was, ready to go home. Miguel couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Finally, the nurse appeared, pushing Sophia in a wheelchair. Her mother was beside her, smiling at Miguel in thanks. Sophia looked up at him and smiled, her eyes sparkling despite the bandages still covering her hand. "Are you ready to go home?" Miguel asked gently. Sophia nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm going to play with my toys again, and I won't be afraid anymore." Miguel smiled. "That's the spirit, Sophia." He looked at her mother, who seemed relieved but also tired. "Thank you for everything, Miguel," her mother said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how we would have managed without you." Miguel shook his head, his face warm with modesty. "I just did what anyone would have done. I'm happy Sophia is okay." Her mother smiled, her eyes shining. "You saved her life. We won't forget that." Miguel felt a lump in his throat. It wasn't about the thanks or the praise. It was about knowing he had made a difference in this little girl's life. Sophia's mother helped her into the car, and Miguel stood for a moment, watching them drive away. He knew he had made the right choice to stay by Sophia's side, but now he felt a mix of emotions. Part of him was glad she was going home, but another part of him knew he would miss seeing her. As the car disappeared from view, Miguel took a deep breath. He had done what he needed to do. Now, it was time to move on. Weeks passed, and life at the factory returned to normal. Miguel threw himself into his work, but he couldn't help but think of Sophia from time to time. The memory of her brave smile stayed with him. One afternoon, just as Miguel was finishing his shift, a familiar car pulled up outside the factory. His heart skipped a beat as he saw Sophia and her mother stepping out. "Sophia," Miguel called, his face breaking into a grin. He walked over to them, his heart lifting at the sight of the little girl. "Hi, Miguel," Sophia said brightly, holding her hand out to him. Her bandages were gone now, and her hand was mostly healed. She was almost back to normal. Her mother gave Miguel a warm hug. "We wanted to stop by and thank you again. Sophia's doing so well, and it's all because of you." Miguel's eyes filled with emotion. He wasn't sure what to say, so instead, he just smiled. Sophia ran over to him and handed him a small drawing. "This is for you," she said. "It's a picture of us, me and you." Miguel's eyes widened as he looked at the drawing. It was a simple picture of two stick figures, one much smaller than the other, holding hands. The words, "Thank you, Miguel," were written in crayon underneath. Miguel took the drawing with a smile, his heart full. "I'll keep this forever," he said, carefully tucking it into his shirt pocket. Sophia grinned. "You're my hero, Miguel." Miguel couldn't help but laugh softly, his eyes misting over. He had saved Sophia's life, but in doing so, she had saved something in him too. He had never imagined how such a small act of kindness could change both of their lives forever. Months passed since Sophia's injury, and life had settled into a new rhythm for both Miguel and the little girl. The memories of that terrifying day at the factory, when Sophia's hand had been caught in the machine, felt like a distant echo now. But the bond between Miguel and Sophia was something that neither time nor distance could erase. Sophia's hand had healed beautifully. After weeks of therapy, she was using it again without any issues. She was back to her playful, curious self, full of energy, laughter, and joy. Miguel often thought about how much had changed since the accident. The factory had become just a place where he worked, while Sophia's memory remained a part of his heart. He had made sure to visit her as much as he could during her recovery, watching as she grew stronger. He had witnessed her courage and strength, and it had inspired him in ways he could never have imagined. One weekend, as Miguel was finishing up his shift, he received a surprise. Sophia and her mother had come to visit him. "Miguel," Sophia called as soon as she saw him, running up to him with a big smile on her face. Miguel's heart warmed as he knelt down to her level. "Hey, Sophia, how are you feeling today?" "I'm feeling great," she said brightly. "Look, I can even do this now." She raised her hand and showed him how easily she could move her fingers, forming a fist and opening it again. Miguel's eyes filled with pride. "That's amazing. You're getting stronger every day." Sophia beamed, then handed him something wrapped in paper. "This is for you," she said, her face full of excitement. Miguel carefully unwrapped the gift, revealing a small hand-carved wooden keychain. It had a heart shape with the words, "Thank you," engraved on it. "I made it myself," Sophia said, her voice full of pride. Miguel's heart swelled. "It's beautiful, Sophia. Thank you so much." He gently hummed the keychain from his work bag, knowing he would carry it with him wherever he went. Her mother smiled and placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "We just wanted to stop by and let you know how grateful we are for everything you did. You really saved her life, Miguel. You gave us a second chance." Miguel felt a lump in his throat, but he smiled back at her. "I'm just glad I could help. I'm happy Sophia is doing so well." Sophia looked up at him, her eyes full of trust. "You're like family now, Miguel. You'll always be my hero." Miguel chuckled softly. "You're the brave one. Sophia, you fought through all of this, and that's something to be proud of." Sophia nodded, her smile wide. "I'm proud of you too." For a moment, Miguel felt a deep sense of peace. The fear and uncertainty he had felt when he first saw her trapped under the machine were gone now, replaced by a feeling of fulfillment. He had helped save a life, and in doing so, he had gained a new purpose. As the day came to a close, Miguel watched Sophia and her mother walk away, hand in hand. It wasn't just the keychain or the thank you that mattered. It was the connection they shared. It was a bond that had been formed in the most unexpected way, and it would last forever. Miguel walked back into the factory with a smile on his face. He knew he had done something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Saving Sophia wasn't just about fixing a hand. It was about giving a little girl a chance at life, and in doing so, it had changed his life too.